He'd moved $600 million through the Port of Vancouver in a single fiscal year, and nobody had ever proven a cent of it. Then a car bomb on a Tuesday morning took his legs from the knees down. Not his empire, not his mind, not his reputation for ending careers with a single phone call, just his legs. 4 financial managers in 6 months, all of them too careful, too cautious, too afraid of what they'd find in his ledgers. Then came a woman who showed up 22 minutes late with a water stain on her blazer, a transit pass instead of a car, and the audacity to tell him, before she'd even sat down, that his Q3 receivables had a $340,000 discrepancy she'd spotted from the summary he'd emailed to her the night before. He hired her in under 10 minutes. It was not what Joss had expected from the interview. She'd expected a test, maybe some manufactured crisis with fake numbers, a balance sheet full of deliberate errors to see if she'd catch them. What she hadn't expected was to be patted down at the gate by a man named Birch, who had the neck of a defensive lineman and the courtesy of a brick wall. He'd taken her USB drive, her staple remover, and, for some reason she couldn't fathom, a single pen. "They're all pens," she'd said, pointing at the 12 identical ones left in her bag. Birch had stared at her. "That one's red." "I use red to mark errors." A long pause. "I'll give it back when you leave." Joss had seriously considered turning around at that point. She had $47 in her chequing account, a rental overdue notice folded inside her planner, and an eviction timeline she'd calculated down to the day. She had 11 of them left before her landlord could legally change the locks. She did not have the luxury of principles. So she'd followed the man with the neck of a defensive lineman through a hallway that smelled of cedar and old money, past oil paintings that were almost certainly purchased for tax reasons, and through a pair of heavy double doors into a room that felt like the inside of someone's worst idea of what powerful men preferred. Dark walls, an enormous desk that was clearly decorative, and a man near the window who hadn't turned around. Radovan Novak sat in a motorized wheelchair with his back to the room, reading something on a tablet. He didn't look up. "You found the discrepancy," he said. His voice was flat, not cold exactly, just stripped of warmth the way certain rooms are stripped of furniture. $341,200 actually, Joss said, setting her bag on the edge of his pristine desk. "I rounded down in the email. Didn't want to alarm you." He did turn around then. She'd looked at his file before the interview. 3 photographs, 1 press photo from 6 years ago at a real estate gala, 1 grainy surveillance shot from a now-deleted blog, and 1 taken outside a courthouse, where he hadn't been charged with anything. In all 3, he'd been standing, tall, the kind of built that made tailored suits look like a personal insult to fabric, sharp-featured, the sort of face that suggested he'd spent a significant portion of his life being difficult in expensive rooms. He was still all of that in the wheelchair, just different. The lines around his mouth were deeper. His eyes, a particular shade of grey that photographs hadn't captured accurately, moved over her with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades reading people and had learned that most of them weren't worth reading twice. He registered her wet blazer. He registered the transit sticker still on her bag. He registered, she was fairly sure, the fact that she hadn't once looked at his legs since she'd walked in. "You worked forensic accounting," he said, "then nothing for 8 months. I found something I wasn't supposed to find. My firm disagreed with my approach to the situation." She crossed her arms. "Which should frankly be a selling point for you. They blacklisted you." "Yes. So you have no options." "I have the option to leave right now. I've been offered a position at a collections agency in Burnaby, and I have until Friday." This was a lie. She had no such offer. But she'd learned, working forensic accounting for 11 years, that the most useful tool in any negotiations was the impression that you had somewhere else to be. Novak looked at her for a long moment. Then the $341,200 came from a project manager redirecting labor costs to a shell account in Richmond. He's been doing it for 14 months. Joss nodded slowly. "I thought it might be something like that. The variance pattern was too clean to be errors." He was Birch's cousin. A beat. And? Birch fired him this morning. Novak set the tablet down on his armrest. I need someone who reads numbers the way I do, as an argument. What do you want? She named a number that was higher than she'd planned to say. Novak didn't blink. Fine. I want it in writing. Obviously. And I want access to everything, all the accounts, all the fronts. If I'm going to find what's bleeding you, I need to see the whole body. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile. You have a gift for metaphor. He rolled his chair toward the desk. Birch will show you your office. The files are there. Joss picked up her bag. She'd made it to the door before he spoke again. The red pen, Novak said. Tell Birch to give it back. 3 weeks in, Joss understood the compound the way she understood a spreadsheet, by its patterns of movement and its anomalies. She understood that Birch arrived at 6:15 every morning. That the man named Santos always stopped for exactly 4 minutes outside the garage on his second perimeter loop. She suspected he was smoking. That Novak worked until 2 in the morning most nights, never ate lunch, and that the housekeeper, Mrs. Kwan, who had clearly been with him long enough to lose her capacity for surprise, left a cup of cold green tea on his desk at 11 each night, which he invariably left untouched. And she understood, without anyone telling her explicitly, that the man ran his entire syndicate from a body that was trying to kill him from the inside out. She found out about the spasms by accident. It was a Tuesday. She'd started to distrust Tuesdays on principle, given that the original car bomb had also been a Tuesday, and she'd stayed late reconciling 3 months of import records that didn't line up. She'd fallen asleep at her desk at some point and woken to the sound of something heavy hitting the floor down the hall. She found Novak in his study, on the floor beside his chair, which had drifted back against the bookcase. His right leg was bent at an angle that made no biomechanical sense. His face was grey. Joss stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds. She could call Birch, who was on night rotation and would not be subtle about any of this. Or she could do the other thing. Spasm, she said. He looked at her like she'd said something offensive. Then, through his teeth, how do you know about spasms? I had a roommate in university who had an incomplete spinal cord injury. Lower lumbar. Joss crossed the room, knelt beside him, and assessed the situation with the same flat attention she gave a balance sheet full of errors. Your leg needs to be straightened before it locks. This is going to be uncomfortable. Don't. She straightened his leg. He made a sound low in his throat that she pretended not to hear. She applied pressure, steady, even, no drama, and talked while she did it, because her old roommate had told her once that the talking was the part that helped, even when the person swore it didn't. The Richmond account, she said. The shell company has a subsidiary I keep coming back to. It's registered in the Caymans, but the operational address is a logistics company in Surrey. It's been transferring to a third account I can't access yet. Novak's jaw was clenched, sweat at his hairline. He was staring at the ceiling with the concentrated fury of a man whose body had put him on the floor and intended to keep him there. The logistics company, he rasped. Name. Calder Pacific. Does that mean something? A pause, and then quieter. Keep talking. So she did. Numbers, mostly. The pattern of transfers, the timing of the shell accounts, the particular signature of someone who knew how to hide money, but not quite well enough. She talked until the spasm peaked and began to subside, until the violent contracting in his legs slowed and stilled, until his breathing evened out. Then she helped him back into his chair. No commentary, no pity. She offered her shoulder, and he took it without being asked twice. I could have called Birch, she said, once he was settled. I know. I didn't. I know. He looked at her. In the low light of the study, just the desk lamp, the rest of the room dark. The lines of his face were very clear. He was 41, she knew from his file, but he looked like someone who'd spent a long time carrying something heavy in both hands. Why? Joss straightened her shirt. Because Birch would have told 6 people by morning. And you run this organization because people are afraid of you. And frightened men don't stay frightened of someone they've seen on the floor. She picked up her notebook from where she'd dropped it. The Surrey connection. I want to pursue it tomorrow. He was quiet for a moment. Joss. She turned. Thank you, Novak said. It came out like he'd had to dig for it. She nodded. She left before it could become something else. The meeting with his lieutenants happened on a Thursday afternoon, and Joss was supposed to be a piece of furniture. Novak's instruction had been clear. Sit in the corner, have the Q4 projections ready on her laptop, speak only if directly addressed. She was the forensic accountant. She was not part of the organization in any capacity beyond the numbers. She sat in the corner. She had the Q4 projections. She did not plan to speak. The man Novak called Stroud had other ideas. Stroud was broad and unhurried in the way that suggested he'd spent years cultivating the impression that nothing could rush him. He had a scar running from his left ear to his jaw that he hadn't bothered to explain away. He sat across from Novak at the long table and looked at him the way Joss had seen men look at ledgers they decided weren't their problem, with the specific flatness of someone doing the math and not liking where it was landing. The port deal, Stroud said. It needs to move by end of month or we lose the window. Castellano's crew is already circling. The port deal moves on my timeline, Novak said. Your timeline has been. Stroud paused, and the pause did a lot of work. His eyes moved briefly but unmistakably to Novak's chair, slower than it used to be. The room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when someone has said the thing everyone was thinking, but nobody with any sense would say aloud. Novak's expression didn't change. He looked at Stroud the way he looked at numbers that didn't add up, with a patience that was, underneath it, entirely without mercy. Slower, Novak repeated. You haven't left this property in 4 months. People talk. Stroud leaned forward slightly. The men need visible leadership. They need to know decisions are coming from someone who can. Another pause, another look at the chair. Who can stand behind them? Joss's pen stopped moving. She watched Novak. She could see from across the room. The exact moment he registered this was not a complaint, but a challenge. She could see the way his right hand found the armrest, not for support, but with the specific stillness of a man deciding something. He couldn't stand up, couldn't cross the room, couldn't do the thing that in rooms like this punctuated the end of arguments. He was sitting in a machine he hadn't chosen, and every man at that table knew it, and Stroud was betting on it. Joss set her pen down. The Q4 projections, she said. Every head in the room turned. Stroud looked at her with the expression of a man who has just noticed a piece of furniture talking. Sorry, she said, not sorry at all. I just want to make sure I understand the concern before I pull these up. She looked at Stroud directly. You're worried about direction, that decisions are coming from someone who can stand behind them. This isn't your conversation, Stroud said. You're right, I'm just the numbers person. Joss opened her laptop and turned it to face the table, which is why it's interesting to me that in the 12 weeks since Mr. Novak's recovery began, the organization's net positive position across its legitimate holdings has increased by 23%. She clicked to the next slide. These are the month-over-month comparisons. The port routing that Castellano has been circling was rerouted 6 weeks ago to a subsidiary that is not visible at the street level. I can walk you through it if you'd like, or you can trust that the man who restructured 3 separate supply chains from a hospital bed 2 days after spinal surgery knows more about standing behind decisions than most people know about making them. Silence. Stroud's jaw worked. Who the hell are you? Joss Merritt, Forensic Accounting. She closed the laptop. The Castellano window isn't closing. I've looked at the logistics. We have another 6 weeks, minimum. If you'd like the data, it's in the folder I sent this morning. She looked at her notebook. She did not look at Novak. She could feel him looking at her. The port deal, Novak said, into the silence, his voice returning to the room like a door clicking shut, moves on my timeline. The timeline is end of month. He let that settle. Stroud, you'll have the updated parameters from Joss by Friday. I suggest you read them. Novak found her in her office an hour later. That was reckless, he said. You're welcome, Joss replied, without looking up from her screen. He rolled to the edge of her desk. She could feel the weight of his attention like a hand on her shoulder. Stroud has put 2 men in the ground for considerably less. I know. I looked at his file. She did look up then. You couldn't do it. You were sitting there and he was making you into a problem of geometry, height, mobility, visibility. He wanted you to try to stand up. He was waiting for you to try and fail. She held his gaze. So I did the other thing. The other thing, Novak repeated. Made it about numbers. You win every argument if you can make it about numbers. She shrugged. It's what I'm for. He was quiet. In the afternoon light through the high windows, his face was less guarded than she'd seen it. Not open exactly, but with a particular expression of someone recalibrating an estimate. I looked at Calder Pacific, he said finally. And it's Stroud's. He's been running a side channel for 11 months. Joss absorbed this. Well, she said, that's a problem with a solution. Yes, his expression shifted into something that wasn't quite satisfaction. It is. She found out how much of a solution on the following Wednesday, when Birch came to her office at 7 in the morning and told her that Stroud had been removed from the organization and that she should not ask what that meant. She didn't ask. What she did ask 3 days later, when Novak handed her a sealed envelope across his desk, was, "What is this?" 6 months' salary in addition to what you're owed. His voice was the same flat register it always was. There's a flight to Halifax on Friday. My contact there runs a legitimate accounting firm. He owes me a favor. He'll give you a position. Good reference. Clean record. Joss looked at the envelope. It was thick. It was the kind of thick that solved problems. Her overdue rent, the collections notice on her student loan, the credit card she'd stopped answering calls from. It was, in every practical sense, exactly what she'd been working toward for 8 months. Is this because of Stroud's people? She said. The ones he was skimming for. Because now they know I was in the room and I can identify the accounts and they... Yes, Novak said. Joss set the envelope back on his desk. You're sending me away because I'm a liability. I'm sending you away because I cannot protect you here, and you deserve to not be a casualty of a war you didn't choose. He said it without inflection, like a line item. This is the logical outcome. You're a risk I can't absorb. I'm a risk, Joss said. That's an interesting framing. She pushed the envelope an inch further back toward him. I'm a forensic accountant. My entire career has been built on finding where the money goes when powerful people don't want it found. I have been blacklisted, audited on false pretenses, had my references burned, and had my car towed twice because someone at my old firm called the city anonymously. I do not run from problems with money attached to them. She picked up her red pen. I run from problems I can't solve. This one has a solution. Novak stared at her. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, she said. I just find terror less interesting than the problem. He said nothing for a long moment. The afternoon light moved across the floor. Outside the compound wall, a crow made an extremely opinionated noise about something. The Halifax offer stands, he said finally, indefinitely. Noted. She opened her laptop. I need to trace the third account from the Calder Pacific chain. If Stroud's external contacts are watching, they're going to try to move the funds in the next 72 hours. Can I get access to the subsidiary statements, or do I need to go around you? You always go around me, Novak said. He sounded like he had decided something and hadn't told her what it was yet. Birch will pull the statements. The breach happened at midnight. Joss was in the east sitting room with a cold cup of tea and the Calder Pacific chain laid out across 3 screens, because the pattern only made sense when you could see all 3 accounts simultaneously. She had been sitting there long enough that her lower back had opinions about her posture. The lights went out. Not all of them, just the compound grid. The emergency backup came on in under 4 seconds, a dull amber that made everything look the color of an old warning sign. Joss knew what a power cut looked like from weather or from equipment failure. She knew what a deliberate grid suppression looked like from 11 years of following money backward to its source. This was the second one. She took the stairs because the lift ran on the main grid. She came through the door of Novak's study to find Birch already there, and Novak already awake, and two men neither of them recognized moving in from the north window. What happened in the next 4 minutes would have been very difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't been in the room. Joss did not have a weapon. What she had was working knowledge of exactly which files Stroud's external contact would need to destroy in the next 60 seconds to remove all evidence of the side channel. The NAS drive, she said very clearly, to Birch, who was between her and both intruders. Top shelf, external casing, get it. Birch got it. The rest was Birch and Novak, and the cold efficiency of men who had survived things Joss had only encountered in financial records. She pressed herself against the wall with the NAS drive clamped against her chest, and did not look at certain parts of the floor afterward, and when it was over the compound was very quiet for a long time. Novak found her in the hallway. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and the drive in her lap, because she had needed to sit down, and this had seemed like a reasonable place to do it. He stopped the wheelchair in front of her. "You're fine," he said. "It was not a question." "The drive has 8 months of Stroud's transfers," she said. "With the right contacts, it's enough to make the external connection very uncomfortable. Legal route. Documented." She looked up at him. "Is that useful to you?" Novak looked at her for a long moment. In the amber emergency lighting, he was very still and very contained, and she could see clearly that he was deciding something in the way he always decided things, the way she decided things, by running the numbers. "Yes," he said, "that's useful." "Good." She stayed where she was. Her legs weren't ready to cooperate yet. "I'll put together a summary in the morning." "Yes." She looked up. His expression had changed in the way she'd only seen it change a few times. The particular shift that happened when he stopped doing the calculation and arrived at the result. He reached down and offered her his hand, not as an assist, not as the mechanical transaction of one person helping another person off the floor, but as a different kind of offering. She took it. "The Halifax position," he said. "I told you I'm not. I'm not sending you. I'm telling you it's there, if you want it." He didn't let go of her hand. "What I'm asking is whether you want to stay." Joss considered this. She ran through the inventory the way she ran through anything. The risks, the variables, the places where the numbers didn't close, and you had to make a judgment call. "The third account," she said, "the one I haven't been able to access. I think it's a real estate holding in North Van, residential. Probably 3 or 4 properties generating clean revenue that nobody's declared. If I'm right, there's a significant tax exposure that's been accumulating for years. I'd like to see it through." Novak looked at her. Something that was not quite a smile moved across his face. The real kind, the one she'd only seen twice before, the one that reached his eyes and made him look like someone who'd once had reasons to use it more often. "That's not an answer," he said. "It's my answer." She held his gaze resting. "The problems are solvable. The pay is, I'll admit, above market, a beat, and you're less difficult to work for than my last firm." That's a very low bar. Most bars are. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he released her hand and rolled back slightly, the way he did when he'd made a decision and was moving toward it. "Monday," he said, "we start with the North Van holdings." Joss picked up the NAS drive and got to her feet. Her legs cooperated this time. "I'll need the property records from 2019 forward," she said. "Birch will have them by 7. I don't start until 8. "You started 2 hours ago," Novak said. "You were sitting on my floor with a hard drive." Joss considered arguing with this and decided not to. She was tired and he was correct, and her tea was cold somewhere in the east sitting room, and that crow was back outside, making the same noise at the window as if it, too, had simply decided that it lived here now, and everyone else needed to accept that. She walked to the door and then stopped, because there was something she'd been carrying through the hallway conversation and the floor and all the way to this moment. And she was a person who did not like to carry items that had already been accounted for. "For what it's worth," she said, without turning around. "What?" "You run more of this organization than anyone in that room on Thursday understands. The logistics reroutes, the restructured subsidiaries, the shell timing. It's sophisticated in a way that doesn't happen by accident." She paused. Stroud was right that visibility matters, but he was wrong about what visibility is. You're visible in every account. You're in the structure of everything. She did turn around then. He thought the chair made you smaller. He was measuring the wrong thing. Novak said nothing. He looked at her with those grey eyes that photographs had never quite captured. Joss nodded once, the way she nodded when a column of numbers finally reconciled. 7:30, she said. "Tell Birch to have the coffee on." She left the door open behind her. The amber light held steady in the corridor, and the compound was very quiet, and somewhere outside a crow had apparently decided that this property was its property now, and was making its peace with that in its own particular way. The chair hummed quietly as Novak turned back toward his desk. He had an empire to run. She had 8 months of financial records to trace to their source. By most calculations, that was not a reason to stay. By hers, it was exactly enough.